Hello, everyone, and again, this is NLP Radio on Air. Today, in our studio, as usual, we are having me, radio NLP presenter Olga Sarkisova. I am a linguist and a philologist, and our usual guest, Alexander Gerasimov, an NLP trainer, of course, is NLP practitioner, NLP master, geography of training sessions and seminars led by Alexander is over 22 countries and 70 cities. Hello, Alexander.
Hello, Olga.
Today we will continue discussing metaprograms. We have already discussed a couple of them, reflexive and active, and types of motivation. From what I remember, as far as I remember, metaprograms is kind of patterns, types of human thinking and our behavior. Today I suggest discussing procedures, opportunities type of people. Procedures and opportunities. I think, Alexander, it's going to be very useful in sales, because when we want to sell something to another, we definitely need to understand the way of his world perception. So let us begin. What is this metaprogram?
These metaprograms are about our procedurality or the ability to think. Some people indeed are accustomed to take their world as a procedure, a schedule, including number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on. At first, then, after, that, and at the end. Such people are fond of lists. Such people need an action plan, checklists. For example, you are such a person, you need to perform a procedure to do something. Well, the simplest example, some people need a recipe to cook something, while other people use their creative fantasy. And another category of people, for better understanding, we take the most opposing points, and on the opposite side, there are people of opportunities, who, on the contrary, don't bear any lists. They have no limits. They have no any rules, procedures. It is an absolutely creative approach. Their mottos sound like, "Let us wade into it, and then we'll decide what to do next. We will play it by ear, or we can be flexible." And they take a corresponding approach if they need to do something, to achieve something, to do something. Such people just start doing it. And their opportunistic approach, of course, it has both strong and weak sides, which is true for procedural people as well.
Definitely. So from what you said, we may associate procedures type of people with regime and plans, if we take generally, and opportunistic type with the flexibility. Right, I see. Alexander, I have already asked this question, but I will ask once again. Is it more inborn, something we are born with, or something that could be developed throughout our life under the circumstances of different factors?
Я сторонник все-таки, что при рождении...
I tend to believe that surely we have certain inborn inherited traits, but of course to a great extent we have acquired characteristics which we're gaining while we're being brought up and during our socialization. For example, we can easily imagine a child born in a military family and another child born in a creative family. And when such a kid is set to do their home exercises, their parents say, "Approve of yourself, be creative," something like that. And a military family having a certain schedule where each process begins at a certain time, surely the environment does influence. Actually, an infant is a very creative person. They are infinitely opportunistic. Take a look at a 3, 5, or 7-year-old kid who hasn't yet joined social institutions, which begin to restrain them and to force them to do something. Children are very curious and inquisitive, and it is very difficult to them to be procedural. And gradually, for example, at kindergarten, at school, they have the beginning of classes, duration of classes. When children pack their school bag, they use a checklist, and gradually habits are formed. And yes, people to a certain extent lose their creativity. However, some people are able to retain this ability through their school and college days and to remain creative, while some people have to make certain efforts to become creative.
It sounds a bit like an oxymoron, actually, to become creative, to have a force. For me, creativity and force, these are two incompatible things, absolutely. It's interesting what you said. To get effort and force to become creative. Have you seen such examples in life?
Я на тренинге таких людей периодически встречаю, которые приходят и требуют, у них требуется.
From time to time, I see such people at my trainings. They really have to make efforts to become creative. It is really a paradox when a person needs to contrive something new. They strain themselves. For example, a creativity exercise. Take an ordinary object, a glass or a pen, anything you have at hand, and contrive 20, 50, 100 methods of application of that object different from its standard function. Many people give up at 20, 15, 20 variants. When they try to contrive something else, they become very tense. Recently, a photographer at my training used to offer 2 or 3 variants at once, as he had an infinite number of variants.
Yeah, okay. Right. I believe depending on the meta program, whether it is a procedure type of person or opportunistic type, when we want to sell them something, we definitely base on their way of thinking. So I think this podcast is going to be extremely and especially interesting for those who sell something to clients. So let's try to look from this prism at this point. People of procedures, schemes, plans, you said. Can we say that people of procedures can be more often afraid, that they are very careful, and people of opportunities are fearless? They have no limits, no boundaries, and we should base on that while trying to sell them something.
Basically, if we are talking about fears of a procedural person, primarily it's chaos, uncontrollable chaos. Such person considers the lack of schedule as madness. Just imagine for a second that trains, metro trains, for example, stores, store opening hours are absolutely random and depend on, for example, just the mood of a train driver. For example, at St. Petersburg-Moscow train can depart at any time when the train driver wants. Or a store. It opens and closes when a salesperson or the owner of a store wants. You come, but the store is closed. But why? For example, siesta de la mañana. Or, I just don't want. The salesperson says, I'm tired. And an opposite situation. For an opportunistic person, the biggest fear is a totalitarian state, which takes over control, total control of nearly everything. It means everything is as scheduled according to a timetable. Everything is available only against ration cards. Everything is listed, and there are no any possible opportunities. In principle. Of course, these are the most opposite points, and each type feels discomfort being on the opposite end. Therefore, we can say that a person on average is to a great extent either procedural with creative elements or creative, because such person has procedurality. Of course, it depends on the context.
It's very logical. I think that it's also useful not only for sellers, but as well for HRs, for leaders of departments, sub-departments. So if they know that about existence of actual metaprograms, they can place their employees according to their metaprograms to the right positions, right? For instance, what could be the best choice of position at work for opportunistic people, loving experiments, loving everything new? What could be the best positions for them? Sales managers? Orators?
I think those are people directly dealing with design, creativity, experiments, marketing, in some cases. However, we understand that if we take the most creative designer, anyway, they should be aware about the deadline, or, for example, a writer. Anyway, they are given certain deadlines. A web designer. They know when a website they're developing should be ready. So we can say that there are opportunities within a certain procedure, or vice versa. There is a procedure and a huge amount of opportunities. For example, a sales manager who has a script, a checklist, who comes precisely as scheduled. However, it is impossible to get covered everything. Even if you have a script with respect to multifarious variants of customers' response, anyway, every 10th customer can say something extraordinary, or their case will be so much unique that the sales manager will not be able to find a typical solution. Therefore, we can consider an idea, get used to it, and even feel sorrow for that many opportunities sooner or later become procedures. It doesn't matter how creative a person is, they will anyway repeat themselves, and this reoccurrence will eventually become a checklist for such a person.
In case he is a professional, an expert of what he does, or in any case, sooner or later, it's gonna be so.
Ну, в каком-то общем смысле это, скорее всего,
Well,
везде.
in a general sense, it rather means everywhere. I can give you an example. A young woman I am acquainted with went to the US to study at the New York Academy of Arts. She lived there for less than 1 year. Then she got back to Russia. I asked her how she was doing, how it was going there. She said that everything was not the way she had expected to be. We thought we would be creating, but we were forced to. For example, 50 paintings, some forest or a field. We were told to draw a field 50 times, a field, to draw a tree or trees 50 times, to draw the sun 50 times. At some point I stopped seeing opportunities in pictures. I realized that any creative process is a certain procedure, which surely includes an opportunity of expressing your personality. However, this is a nuance.
I see. Right, I can say the same on my example too. When I studied at a linguistic university, we studied 6 years actually, not 5. Linguists study 6 years. And as well, we were expecting interesting literature. We were expecting compositions, essay, and so on. But in fact, we had a plan, an exact plan, like every semester, every trimester, to read like hundreds and hundreds of books, to make reports, which we actually hate doing, to write the defined number of essays or compositions, the same everywhere. It's very right. But this is what makes it professional, doesn't it? This is exactly what makes it professional.
I think that the next step for a professional, for example, if we take, for example, Salvador Dali, who used to combine styles until he developed his own unrepeatable, unique style, it was his creative invention. What is creativity? It is inventing something that didn't exist earlier. What makes a certain practical sense?
Yeah, okay. As for Salvador Dali, I see. I believe he was an opportunistic type of person, of course. Okay, and somebody sold his paintings. Now, Alexander, how to identify people with this or that type of thinking? How do we see them? How do we guess immediately what type of person is in front of us? Could you give a few instruments or tools?
First of all, we can pay attention to the clothes they wear. The clothes of an opportunistic person will very much differ from the clothes of a procedural person. For an opportunistic person, dressing is an act of creativity, combining the uncombinable, intertwining the unintertwinable, while a procedural person rather wears a suit having, for example, a row of buttons, adheres to a certain dress code, certain rules. We can distinguish between them, opportunistic and procedural people, even judging by how they move. For example, an opportunistic person is characterized by a swaying motion, head rotation, tilts, an unpredictable trajectory or easily predictable trajectory. And a procedural person who are moving strictly towards their destination, having an action plan comprising number 1, number 2, and number 3 items. The speech of an opportunistic person is characterized by phrases such as, "What if?" "By the way." But on the other hand, "Probably," "Why not?" A procedural person will surely be using words such as first, second, third, in the beginning, then, after that. And even if they communicate with each other, they meet each other and want to talk, each will go their own way. As soon as a procedural person announces a procedure, an opportunistic person will immediately contrive several variants of how such procedure could be disturbed. What if we fall short? What if it goes wrong? By the way, and vice versa. A procedural person will be asking an opportunistic opponent, "You tell me what goes first, what goes then, and after that." And it could lead to a conflict between them.
Yeah, exactly. One question. When you mentioned clothes, that how to identify a person with an opportunistic way of thinking and procedure way of thinking, you mentioned clothes. But I believe that it's only a criteria to look at in this case when the person values clothes, when this is important for him, when it's a value, how to dress. Maybe for someone it's not important how to dress, and then this criteria will not work. What would you say?
In this case, I would suggest that you should pay attention to other components. I mean, some people want to deliver their creativity to the world. They pick clothes to display their creative way of thinking. For example, a girl may supplement her outfit with, let it be a brush or some fashion items that would deflect people's attention, and that won't be straight lines, distinct angles, and transitions. To some people it is critical to demonstrate their procedurality and seriousness. They intentionally won't use such elements in their dress code. The same is true for the speech. The speech of an opportunistic person can both accelerate and slow down. Their pitch may get higher or lower, and they can stop speaking abruptly. And a procedural person who seems to be reading a parade guidelines, like blah, 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 very monotonously.
And very often people with opportunistic type of behavior, they have some kind of distraction in their speech. So their speech doesn't sound logical, doesn't sound structured. Somehow they jump from one idea to another without even noticing that. I think it's very typical of opportunistic type of people. Maybe their thought, maybe their mind is faster than their speaking. We very often can observe this situation. Okay, so clothes, the way of speaking, maybe any other Any other signs for us to see?
If it is possible, we could take a look at a person's workplace. A workplace as a room, space, and as a tool, a computer or a phone. You will notice that a procedural person has everything at place. You can see that such person creates a certain structure. Everything has its own place. A creative person's workplace is always characterized by a mess, chaos, which is above a structure. All things are somewhere. Things may be spread across the floor, and if you tidy it up, a few days later there will be creative craziness again.
It will be only worse for him if someone decides to help him out and to clean everything over. It will only be doing harm for him, in fact. Now we are moving closer to, I think, a very significant factor in this topic. It's a factor of context. Definitely, I think if we approach this topic with a brain and not chaotically, we will see that it's contextual. It definitely is contextual. We understand it. Now let's dwell a little bit on that. Could in one context it be fully opportunistic and in the other one fully procedure, or it doesn't exist, it always partially?
I think we could find a medical context. For example, when you visit an outpatient clinic to check your health, to get treatment, or for any other purpose, you wouldn't like to visit an opportunistic doctor who is willing to do experiments on his or her patients. And when you need medical procedures, you visit a procedure room, but not an opportunistic room where a doctor says, well, we haven't performed an appendectomy this way yet, but let's do an experiment. Let us perform it, for example, through the back. There are areas related to our significant values, such as, for example, health, family, raising children, in which we wouldn't like to do experiments. And it is our choice and other context. When procedures don't work any longer, we can start using opportunities. It may be related to inventing something new, what would allow your company or your business to survive. When legislation eventually changes your business structure so much that you need to contrive something, or when there are no more customers, in this case you need to invent something new. Various brainstorms are exactly processes of inventing something based on previous procedures' limits.
Okay, let me specify a little the question. Let's take one person. One person. It definitely is possible that in one context he's fully opportunistic and in the other is fully procedure, right? It's possible.
Yes, I can easily imagine a person who is, for example, a military man and who then travels to Turkey or goes fishing or something like that just to relax, because the context requires lots of attention and efforts, and he needs relaxation. As a proverb says, if you work sitting, you should take a rest standing. If you work in the field of procedures, you should have a rest at the area of opportunities. If you work in the field of opportunities, you should have a rest in the area of procedures. It will be kind of compensation for a person. It will also allow for training his or her attention.
It's a great approach.
As it could be useful in the future, I can imagine a military man living in tough procedures for 20, 30 years. It may be, on the one hand, limiting. On the other hand, how should he take a rest then? So they take a rest exactly through such alteration.
Reload. Okay. It's I think to work in one regime, to have a rest in the other, it's a very conscientious approach. People, those who are very well aware, they can signify it and they can regulate it, how to relax and how to work and which context to use. But our dear listeners, this is exactly what we are speaking about it for. Alexander is telling you this exactly for the purpose for you to identify it and put the limits in a wise way. Okay, I think that for now it's quite clear. If there is nothing else which you would like to add, I think we could move on probably to the next podcast and to the next topic. What would you say? Alexander, probably some tips or advice for our listeners on that topic.
I suggest that our listeners should write in their comments in which contexts they are to a greater extent procedural and in which opportunistic. Probably it will allow you to recognize all your peculiarities and in some cases to strengthen a certain context due to a procedure or your opportunities.
Have you ever analyzed that? Have you ever identified which context you're in and what type? I think that this podcast, this Alexander's performance today, has made you more aware. So please write below in the commentaries. We are expecting likes and reposts are also welcome. And we hear each other in the next podcast. Bye!
Bye, thank you.